Happy Thursday, Facebook friends. It's time for another edition of our Thursday Teacher Talk. I'm Angie Garza, Director of Professional Learning and Educational Services at ROE 47, serving Lee, Ogle, and Whiteside counties. And if you've been joining us this month for our Thursday Teacher Talks, you will know that we've been spending a lot of time focusing on this idea of our earliest learners. So we have talked about our home visiting programs. We've had some conversations about preschool and coordinated intake. And today we are so excited to be kind of diving into the world of kindergarten. And I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Stacy Dingus. And Stacy, I don't know about you, but when I think about my career as an educator, kindergarten was something really scary that I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could ever teach that grade level.
Well, I'm a middle school teacher at heart, and I have to say I would take middle schoolers any day over those little kindergartners. And I really think that it's true that kindergarten teachers are a special breed. I'm super excited to talk to Carie today and find out the ins and outs of dealing with those little ones.
Well, as Stacy mentioned, we are very blessed today to be joined by Carie Ramirez. Carie is a 15-year veteran of kindergarten, and she is joining us today after a very, probably very long day at Washington Elementary School in Dixon. Hi, Carie, how are you?
Great. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. We're quickly ending March and already looking ahead to April, if you can believe that.
It just seems crazy that we're this far into the school year. I don't even know where it's gone. It seemed to start off so slow, and then all of a sudden now we're here at the last quarter of the school year. It's just insane.
I agree. It seems like we're in some kind of COVID time warp, but for you, especially as a kindergarten teacher, it must just be so interesting to watch those kindergarten students grow and change from the start of the school year to the end of the school year, whether we're in a COVID situation or not. So thank you for all the work that you do with our kindergarten students. So if you don't mind, I have some questions for you about navigating kindergarten. And I'm sure all of our listeners, especially our families out there, are going to appreciate this really important discussion we're about to have. So Carie, one of the things that I'm curious about is, what are some of those things if I have a child who's preparing to go into kindergarten next year, and it seems like a long way off, but it really isn't. What are some of those things that my child should know and be able to do before they come see you next fall?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that, because so many people think of academics. So they think of, my kid needs to know all their letters and all their sounds. They need to be able to count to 100. They need to be able to do all these things. But really what kindergarten teachers would really love for you to do as a parent is to make sure that your child can take care of themselves. So they can use the bathroom on their own. They can zip and button and work on tying. And we understand that tying isn't always going to be, they're not going to be ready to tie at the beginning of kindergarten, but to start working on those things. But the zipping and the buttoning of their coats and their clothes also helps out a lot. Playing and sharing with others, that's a huge, huge thing. So the social aspect of it. And I know with COVID, it's been very hard for kiddos to have play dates, but that's just a really big, important factor, is being able to come into kindergarten and to be able to make friends, to talk, to socialize, to use your manners, please and thank you. And I know this isn't something that you can work on at home, but a lot of those things is just waiting your turn. So you can work on those things, but not necessarily raising of your hand. Like I said, taking turns. So especially if you have siblings, and your child wants to start talking to you, and another one of your children is talking to you, just to have them stop and wait. So that taking turns in the talking, taking turns playing games. So those are some really big things. Following, 1-2 step directions, just simple directions. Take off your shoes and put them away. So things like that. Again, I know so many people focus on those academics, but really we want that social part of it.
Carie, you brought up a really interesting point. We have been living in these exponential times right now. We have young people who haven't been able to socialize perhaps as they normally would. So if I'm sitting here and I'm a parent and I'm thinking about this next step for my child, thinking about kindergarten for next fall, what are some ways that I can help to make that transition easier for my child? I don't even know, I'll be honest with you, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about, we've had kindergarten nights. A lot of our districts are rethinking those. So as a parent, how can I advocate for my child and best prepare them for that major transition to enter into our K-12 systems?
That is a really great question, and it's a hard question because every child is so different. Um, but just starting by having your child become more independent, because as we say, kindergarten is a year of independence. And so when we say independent, having them get dressed themselves, having them put on their shoes themselves, having them try to tie their shoes, even if they can't, just having them try. And that's a really huge, huge thing, is to have them try. And that's the biggest thing in my classroom is not to say that I can't, but to say I will try. So even if something is hard, we don't know if we can do it unless we try it. And so I think that's one of the biggest things is to let your child try things on their own. So many times we see parents always wanting to do things for their kids. I get it. It's easier to just say, you know what, I'll do it. Don't worry about it. I'll hang up your coat. I'll put your shoes away. I'll do this. It's quicker. It's faster. But having your child become independent is super important for making that transition into kindergarten, because you have one teacher and you have 25 children. Sometimes you have an assistant in that classroom and sometimes you don't. So it's super important to make sure that your child can try to do some of those things on their own.
Carie, it has been years since I have had a kindergarten student myself. They grow up way too fast. But could you maybe speak a little bit more about some daily routines or activities that parents could do at home that could help their child to grow cognitively or even social emotionally?
Sure. So one of the things that I always say is super important to parents, especially at the beginning of the year, is yes, video games are great for certain parts of your child's life, but to also have them use their imagination. So that imaginative play, so they can play with you, they can play with their siblings. If you have cousins that are around the same age or even older or younger, it's okay. They can play with anyone, right? So imaginative play. We have great resources for that around the area. We have My Play Village, so they can go and do things like that. We have the Discovery Center. They can do things like that just so that they're getting hands-on experience, but they're also being able to use their imagination at the same time. So that's super, super huge. It's just being able to have an imagination and think on their own. The other thing is to be consistent in your discipline. So if you're telling your child, if you're not going to do this, we're not going to have this, then make sure you follow through with that. Because that's one of the biggest things is if there's no follow through, then your child's not going to learn that there's any rules and that they have to follow them. So that's super huge as well. And then the other thing is this is something super simple and something that I think most people do, but just to be cognizant of doing it is to use like positional words in your everyday talk. So talking about put this on the counter or put this under the table, put the napkin on top of the table, put the fork on top of the napkin. So just using those positional words in your everyday talk, that can help too. And that can just be part of, again, like you were saying, your daily routine, just making sure that you remember to use those kind of words in your daily vocabulary. So that'll help as well.
Carie, this has been great information. I know that, as we look at our 1-year anniversary of being in this pandemic, for many parents, that transition to kindergarten, perhaps, and even for those students, that transition to kindergarten might be looking a little, maybe even more scarier than usual, just because we haven't had some of those things happening as normal in our schools and districts and in our classrooms. But what you've shared with us today is really simple, practical advice for parents and guardians to engage with their children, to be very explicit with their language, and just to have those relationships and have fun. So wonderful words of wisdom, and something that as you were sharing, I was reflecting on with my own children and their growing up as they started their educational journey. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Friends, this wraps up our series all month long. We've been talking about our earliest learners, and so we are coming to a close, but never fear. Next week, we will be back again for another edition of Teacher Talk, and we will be investigating some other topics and having some wonderful guests share their knowledge and expertise with all of our friends and followers in Leogal and Whiteside counties. So on behalf of Stacy Dingus, and special thanks to our guest today, Carie Ramirez, have a wonderful Thursday, an even better weekend, and we will see you right back here next Thursday for another edition of Teacher Talk.